Boss fights. They are often remembered as the high points of many action games. Some carry their game's legacy forward for years, remaining etched in players' memories forever. But what makes a good boss fight for an action game? How do you make it a memorable and dynamic action experience while keeping player expression high? In this video, I'll share how I designed the boss fights around the core combat system by creating various skill checks that lead to cinematic fights. I'll start by showing which inspirations I drew from and what struggles I faced, and eventually show what I currently prototyped and created for the game. Eyes of the Sky is a stylish action RPG inspired by games such as Kingdom Hearts and Devil May Cry, in which you play a spellcasting swordsman, comboing your enemies into the air while managing your mana and dodging attacks. In the previous video, I discussed how I added depth to the combat system using the form change mechanic, which lets you change your moveset and access powerful spells depending on which combos you land. So if you haven't watched that yet and you find that interesting, please go check it out. When I started designing boss fights for Eyes of the Sky, my main goal was to test the player's skill in both offense and defense. Meaning, to test how well the player can guard or dodge attacks that required tight execution, and then test how well they can exploit those openings and create combos. However, I also had to limit the player somewhat. In normal combat, the player's combos are usually only interrupted if another enemy hits them or they have to dodge. Otherwise, they are only limited by their own technical skill. This couldn't be the case in boss fights where there's only one enemy. It only follows then that bosses must be able to break out of combos. This sounds a bit counterintuitive. Why would you want to interrupt the player's potentially stylish combo? Isn't that the whole point of an action game? Well, not exactly. The combo is only impressive if it's hard to do. This not only refers to the technical skill required, but also to the limits imposed by the game's mechanics. If there's a limitation on how long a combo can be, or how much damage it can do, it actually serves to enhance the experience and heighten the skill ceiling. This is indeed the case for all of the boss fights in combo-centric games such as Devil May Cry, and almost all the bosses in Kingdom Hearts as well. In almost all instances, bosses can break out of the player's attack sequence, sometimes even in a way that punishes the player. In Devil May Cry, the bosses have a simple hit counter. When a certain number of hits is dealt, they usually jump away or retaliate, after which they can't be staggered again for a while. In Kingdom Hearts, there's a specific mechanic called revenge value. Essentially, this is a separate hidden meter that increments as you combo the boss. When it gets to a certain point, the boss will break out of the combo by using an attack. This is different from damage or hit thresholds, as different attacks add different values to the RV meter regardless of how much damage they do. I took a lot of inspiration from the post-game bosses of the Kingdom Hearts series, which employ this mechanic. The post-game bosses in Kingdom Hearts, specifically the data battles and the lingering wheel fight, have some very satisfying design choices that mesh well with the combat system. They force you to be patient, observe, learn the boss's patterns, and find your openings strategically. This is in contrast to the majority of the mid-game bosses in Kingdom Hearts, which you can normally beat even without a good grasp of the combat system. Of course, not all post-game bosses are like that. Some are more gimmicky than others, but I wanted to draw inspiration from the bosses I've found most fun to fight. To create a boss fight that is both cool to play as well as cool to look at, you have to limit the player's offense. Otherwise, the player is just wailing on a punching bag in the shape of a boss. To prevent the player from simply continuously spamming attacks, I designed my bosses so that they can only be staggered during specific openings. If the player tries to attack them before those openings, they might dodge the attack or even parry it. I also gave bosses a property sometimes referred to in fighting games as super armor, which means they can't be staggered during the startup of their attack animations, limiting the player to only punish them after they properly dodge. To better communicate this to the player, I added a special effect to show when an attack has no effect due to armor. I did this in hope that this will help players learn the boss's patterns faster. This means the boss's openings are usually earned by either dodging their attacks, guarding them, or casting a spell at the right time. Once the player exploits the opening, they are free to combo the boss however they wish until the revenge value is broken, during which the boss will retaliate. The revenge value is always constant and deterministic, which means that players who are experienced can dodge and punish the retaliation, or even avoid it altogether by stopping their combo short. These principles influenced the way I designed each attack in the boss's arsenal, but I was still not done. I wanted to add special cinematic attacks that tested the player's skill to the extreme. To signal such attacks, I used the sound cue as well as a special effect and animation of the boss charging up their strength combined with the screen turning black. During such ultimate attacks, as I call them, the boss is completely invulnerable, and the player must successfully evade in order to get an opening, or at least avoid taking damage. To make sure diligent players are rewarded, I made sure the attack patterns are deterministic so that they can be memorized. The final step was to program in boss phases. Depending on how much health it has left, the boss can use different attacks and different patterns. For example, it may not use its ultimate attack until the second phase, and during the third phase it might start using more attacks which are hard to dodge, ramping up the difficulty towards the end of the fight. Putting all of this together, I reached a prototype for a boss I'm happy with. Using the system I've built, I can easily add attacks, change patterns, and tweak the difficulty by editing the boss's phases. The result is a boss fight where you need to learn the patterns, dodge, guard, and punish accordingly, which leads to a satisfying fight with a lot of cool moments. Currently, I have 2 bosses prototyped. The first one uses every feature I detailed in this video and implements a variety of attacks. It's pretty hard at first, but serves as a good benchmark and proof of concept of what the system is capable of. The second boss is closer to my image of what an early game boss fight should look like. It starts off using just one attack, which you can guard, and when you get the hang of it, it ramps up the difficulty but keeps the core of the fight the same. It uses a greater variety of attacks as well as an ultimate, but you can still guard or dodge all of them and punish in the same way. Going forward, my goal is to implement bosses to slowly introduce elements such as the super armor, attack patterns, and ultimates as you progress through the game. If you're interested in unedited gameplay of me fighting bosses, there should be some on this channel, but I can always upload more, just let me know in the comments. If you enjoyed this devlog and found it interesting, you can like the video, subscribe, and follow my progress on Twitter. Thank you for watching.